As debilitating as it is common, depression, the illness, can eat away at a person's belief that life is worth living. But with treatment, people can find their way back to purpose, contentment, and, well, life. Find out what to look for and how to get help as we talk about depression tonight on Speak Your Mind. Welcome to Speak Your Mind. I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps, licensed psychologist with the Human Development Center. And tonight we're talking about one of the most common mental health issues, depression. Worldwide, millions have it, but only 20% of millions are getting the help they need. So that means 80% of millions are not getting the help they need, and treatment works. So tonight is the perfect opportunity to have your questions about depression answered. Call the numbers on your screen right now. Locally, dial 218-788-2844 or call toll-free at 1-877-307-8762. And you can also text us your questions or email them using the number or address listed at the bottom of your screen. And now for tonight's guest. Dr. Doug Heck is a licensed psychologist with the Duluth Psychological Clinic. His practice includes the assessment and treatment of depression. Dr. Margaret Saraceno is a staff psychiatrist with the Human Development Center who's board certified in child, adolescent, and adult psychiatry. And Rena Carey has suffered with depression for many years. She's with us this evening to share her journey from despair to leading a life worth living. Thanks to all of you for being here tonight, and thanks for all of you out there who are not watching the Viking games and who are joining us for this very important show. And Rena, to get us started, I think you've suffered with depression for a very long period of time, and I think that when we talked first on the telephone, you told me that your depression started in childhood. And tell us a little bit just about what that was like in your childhood with the depression.
Well, when I first started with the depression, I would stay in my bedroom. I would have the door shut, or sometimes I would just sit on my bed in the dark because I didn't know what was going on inside my head. And a lot of people thought I was always in a shell, but I felt safe that way. But,
and you were how old then?
Oh, I had to been about 10, 11 years old, somewhere around there. And it just kind of floored me, and I was starting to get these really weird ideas about wanting to hurt myself. I kept it all to myself. And I just dealt with it for many, many years, and it kept building and building and building.
And that must have been frightening at that age to have those, I like the way you put it, those weird thoughts about wanting to hurt yourself at such a young age.
Yeah, because I was scared as to what was going on inside of me. I didn't know, because I didn't know how to take care of it. And then when I got older, I did hurt myself, but I knew how to take care of that. But when you're a kid and you have depression, you think that you're a flaw. You failed somehow and you're being punished, but it's not that way.
And so I think what we're gonna do tonight is we're gonna have Rena tell parts of her story, and then we're going to interweave some of our other guests' information about this so that we keep you hooked into the story here. And so you see kids with depression.
Yes, I do.
Tell us a little bit about how what Rena was saying matches what you see with the kids and how depression presents itself in children.
Mm-hmm. Depression can present like it does in adults, but it also can present somewhat differently with children. They might become more irritable and angry and have mood swings. They can have sleep disturbance. They can feel more or become more isolative and withdrawn and not want to do their sports, or their grades can fall. They don't try anymore because their motivation is poor. Their energy is poor, and their personality kind of just changes. They're just not having fun. And they can have thoughts of death and dying like you have had, and they can have thoughts of scratching on their arms or hurting themselves in other ways. So it's really, really important to to recognize those signs as parents, helping them to understand what signs to look for, because if you can catch it early, you can prevent many years of heartache and
That's
and
right.
pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sounds like that wasn't kind of caught early, maybe with you. Is that true, Rena?
That's true. It got caught when I was in my maybe late 20s. So I think I've been dealing with having a mental illness since 10, 11 years old, and I'm in my mid 50s now.
And hopefully with shows like this, then this information can get out and intervention can be done sooner.
Yes, that would be great.
And so, how did your depression change over the years, Rena? So when you got to be an adult, was it the same as when you were a child?
It was more complex for me, because as I got to be an adult, and when I finally got to leave home and be on my own, everything just escalated. That's when I did start hurting myself. And I was scared. I thought, oh, I can't talk to anybody. They're not going to understand. So I kept it. And then I eventually, I don't know how many years, but in my, it had to be in my late 20s. It got to be so bad, then I wound up being in the hospital over and over and over with, hurting myself and hiding, and, you try to put up a front, try to show a happy face so people can't see what's actually going on.
And so this is really different, Doug, for people from just having a bad day or even having a string of bad days. I mean, clearly in listening to Rena's story, it's not just that she had many strings of bad days here. And talk a little bit about how people might know the difference between I'm having a normal reaction to a difficult life situation that's going to clear up on its own versus I have an illness.
I think the biggest difference is that the day-to-day or periodic bad feelings that people have are usually things that people can cope with pretty well. They may be upset, they may not feel good, but over a few days or a few weeks, they generally cope reasonably well. But with depression, there's really a detrimental effect to it. It's really harmful to one's self, to sometimes relationships, other kinds of things you're doing in the job, in your life. So it's a detrimental influence that people have, as opposed to something that's just periodically or mildly difficult for them. So one of the things we look for is if you're experiencing symptoms that are ultimately going to hurt you in some way, and yours did, it caused you to end up hurting yourself, then that leads us to look at it more as a condition, as a depression, as a diagnosis.
And then people are going to have more difficulty just functioning in their lives, whether it be in school or at work. And were you working when you were in your mid-20s then?
Yes.
And did the depression affect your ability to work?
Yes, it did. I wound up having to take leaves of absences because I was in the hospital, and then I wound up having to quit my job because I was too sick to work. I didn't know if I was going to be happy one day or ill the next, and if I was going to wind up in the hospital. And then I was taking care of 2 little boys too, and your world has gone crazy on you. So it was hard.
A viewer called in, Dr. Saraceno, how do you deal with living with a depressed person? It feels depressing.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. That is really hard. And another hard thing about living with a depressed person is if that depressed person is not willing to get help. That can be a situation where sometimes the depression is so bad and the inertia is so bad and the withdrawal and the insight might not be to the point where somebody recognizes I really need to get help. And that can be really hard on a relationship where you want to have interaction with your partner and you want to have fun times and you want to go out and do things, and the depression is causing the individual with it to want to isolate and withdraw and not be part of life. So absolutely that's a stress and is something that a partner would need to deal with in a relationship. Encouraging the person with depression to get help, but then if that person doesn't, there's sometimes that you have to help yourself and cope with the person who's not willing to get help, unless it gets to the point where you have to force that person to get help. If suicidal thoughts and gestures become more prominent, then of course you need to do what you can to get them help. That's a good question and a hard, there's no easy solution to that.
And so sometimes if you're living with a depressed person, you yourself may seek help just to know how to get out of not having somebody else's depression overwhelm you. Is that what you would recommend?
Absolutely. I think the one of the struggles that people have, say a spouse, let's take for an example a husband who's concerned about his wife who he feels is depressed. He may not know how much to help, as you were indicating. Sometimes spouses will try to figure out, maybe I should try to fix this somehow. Maybe I'm the problem, or maybe there's something I'm not quite doing right. So a spouse might try to do various things, help more around the house, or do things for his wife, and ultimately it may not help the depression. And so he ends up feeling helpless and not feeling like he's really doing any good for her. And she may still remain irritable or crabby or really down in spite of that. So now he starts to feel down because he doesn't know what to do.
Or angry
So-
and resentful.
Yep.
That can be part of it too.
Yeah.
What was that like for you, being in relationships when you were depressed?
When I was married at the time when I really got mad or bad. And I know that it was very hard on my husband at the time. He got to the point he didn't know what to do, and he was calling. I know of a couple of times that he had called Miller Dwan, to find out what should I do, But I gotta admit, he did pretty good in taking care of our sons when I was ill, whether I was in the hospital or at home. But
So this
it was
is really
hard.
important because depression doesn't just affect the person; it's a family illness.
It is.
Then, right? And so everybody then needs to learn to start adjusting about how do I figure out how to take care of myself and how do I make adjustments. No different than if a person was physically ill and at home and wasn't able to do their usual things. Let's just start talking about some treatment. Here is a gentleman from Chisholm calls in and says, what is the most mild treatment for depression if I already take a lot of medications? Doug?
My very first thing that I work with people on that has a lot of good support in terms of the literature and studies that have looked at this is activity. It really does help. Not only does it help people feel better, but there's also some evidence that it changes the chemistry in the body. So even getting out for a walk or something very mild, it doesn't require seeing a professional, it doesn't require insurance payments or anything like that. It requires a little motivation, but exercise can be a really nice start.
And it's free.
And it's free.
And it's free, but I think the funny part about that is that, and I'm familiar with that and always preaching that to my clients as well. But the funny thing about that with depressed people is that you're asking people often who feel this great sense of loss of energy and no ambition and no motivation to now go out and do something. And that's a bit of a challenge sometimes,
It
right?
is, because I think all of us, to make a decision about whether we go and do something, we first check, do I have the energy? Do I really want to do this? And with depression, those things are likely not going to be there. And so the person's frame of reference for doing something has to be, no, I don't really feel like doing this, but it's important that I do it for my treatment. I know I don't feel like I'm not really going to enjoy this, but I remember that this is what I need to do on a daily basis. So it becomes important because they know it's part of their treatment.
A lot of your depression involved isolation, which would be probably not a whole lot of activity going on. And so what's your take on what Doug just said about activity helps?
I believe it does help because I'm not doing as much as I should, and my therapist is after me to keep getting out there and everything, you know. But if you can keep active, it does something in the brain, I believe. And you know, if you can exert yourself too, not to the point where you're harming yourself, but keep it busy, you know. I do a lot of crossword puzzles, and that even helps you if you can keep your mind occupied, walking, bike riding, anything, you know.
So in depression, doing nothing might be what you want to do, but it's about the worst thing you can do, that it makes the illness
It's like
worse.
the Nike ad, the Nike swoosh.
Yeah.
I tell people that sometimes you just have to do it. Just do it. And those endorphins get going and your body feels better. And physically, you can feel better. It works your heart, it works your lungs, it works your brain. I mean, your blood to the brain. Absolutely.
Here's a caller from Cloquet calls in and asks, when do I know if I should be going on medication for the treatment of my depression? Dr. Saraceno.
Oh, that depends on the extent of the depression and what you've tried. If you've tried the exercise, if you've tried the therapy, if you tried your self-help books and support from friends, if all else fails and you're still feeling that profound dysphoria, sadness, low motivation, low energy, and you're just not getting better, then I think it's reasonable to try something. Some people prefer to try, you know, natural or complementary medicine, omega-3 fatty acids, some supplements, vitamin D. Yet if that does not work, then you can start exploring the option of psychotropic medications, antidepressants, SSRIs, and that could be a whole talk there.
And go ahead.
And I also think to add to that too is if you, as we were talking about earlier, if you have a family member at home who is saying, you know what, if you don't go get help, I'm not sure how much longer I can stick around, or the children are really, really getting upset here, we think you really need to go get some help. Or if your boss or a good friend is giving you feedback that you're not doing as well as you used to, what's going on. All of those are indications to me that there needs to be a discussion possibly about what else could be done.
And you've been on medication for the treatment of your depression. And what's your experience been with that?
Well, I've been on a lot of medications. A lot of them didn't work. They did the complete opposite of what they were supposed to do. And then there was one time when no medication helped. So I was in the hospital and wound up having to have a series of shock treatments. And from what I was told how I was before I had it, you know, I was hiding in corners and everything. And, you know, they kept saying, well, try this medicine, try that medicine, but it wasn't working. I was just getting worse.
And I want to go back and talk about the shock treatments in a second, but here you were on medications, and now in your life, are you on medications for depression?
Well, right now, I'm only on 2 psych meds right now. I used to be on way over 10 of them. And right now, I think I've made an achievement just by being on 2 of them.
Good for you.
Thank you.
And do you think that, like the medications you're on now, do you feel like they help?
Yes, I do.
So here you are, you're on all of these medications. There's periods of time where not only do they not help, they make you feel worse. I want to know how it is that you were willing to keep trying different things and to keep trying even different medications, because it's not like you're not on medication right now, you're on greatly reduced, but you hung in there. And what's your secret? Because
I was desperate. I wanted to live. You know, I wanted to feel joy, happy, hope. You know, I was tired of feeling despair. And, you know, I had 2 boys to take care of. You know, they're my life, you know. So I didn't want to give up. You know, many times I would say, I can't handle this no more, you know. But, you know, there was times where I was suicidal. That's it, this is over. But I hung in there.
so, and part of what I just heard you say is that you used your desperation almost as a source of motivation to hang in there.
Yes.
And I think that's just so important that also that people understand that sometimes the first medicine doesn't work, but to not give up, as Rena so graciously shared with us. The now the shock treatment, that is the kind, electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, is the kind of treatment that a lot of people out there associate with scary movies about mental health, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So tell us a little bit first, Dr. Saraceno, about electroconvulsive therapy and how it's maybe different now than it was back in the scary days.
Yeah, it is absolutely a wonderful treatment for people that are refractory, which means nothing has been helpful. Like for you, you've been on so many medications and nothing's been helpful. They put electrodes on your head and they induce a seizure, and they give you medicine so that you don't bite your tongue and your arms and legs aren't shaking. It's not like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. It's in a very safe and sterile environment, and after the treatment you stay and you rest, and then within a few treatments people can turn around. I've seen amazing turnarounds with ECT. One that I remember so clearly from my training down in Rochester was a farmer who in the winter got so depressed and he couldn't get out of bed, and he wasn't eating and wasn't doing anything. Nothing was helping him, and then after after 2 shock treatments, and by the 3rd, absolutely, he was up and he was eating and he was conversing. It was like, oh my God, there is something to this, and it gets the chemicals in the brain in balance, and people can do better, amazingly better.
I think one of the things that I think about as I listen to you is that I think it's important for people to know that about 8 out of 10 people who are diagnosed with major depression are going to get better with treatment, and that treatment doesn't always include ECT. It typically includes the usual kinds of treatment involving therapy, medication, and nutritional changes, exercise, all sorts of things. So your example is a very important one to understand, that for those 20% of people that go on and struggle with getting better, there are some options there, and that's why it's important to not give up hope, and you didn't. And that's a very, as Carolyn was saying, it's a very amazing part of what you had, because depression robs us of hope.
Yeah.
So you're pointing out that there is hope for those individuals who have struggled for a long time.
And it's hard work, very hard work.
And the ECT for you, when I talked with you before the show, I said, you know, some people are afraid of ECT because they have a little bit of memory loss with that. And your experience was with that?
Well, I did lose a lot of my memory, especially the long term. And people would tell me, well, Rena, do you remember doing this? And I go, no. And I still have some memory problems. But when I talked to you, I said, you know, if the shock treatments helped get me out of the way I was, it was worth having them. You know?
What exactly what you said to me was, I lost a few memories and I got a life.
That's right.
And I asked you if you thought it was a fair trade.
Yes, it was a fair trade, a very good fair trade. Yes, I don't regret doing it. Sure, I get a little bummed because I can't remember some things, but hey, I'm alive today. You know, I'm enjoying my life.
A woman from Duluth calls in and says, what are the different types of antidepressants and what are the positives and negatives, Dr. Saraceno?
Oh, that's a long question.
Let's not maybe do the different types of antidepressant medications, but sort of the pros and cons, positives and negatives.
Okay, there's different classes of antidepressant medications, and one picks a medication for someone based on their symptoms. So if somebody has an agitated, anxious depression, you wouldn't want to give an antidepressant that has some activating properties. But with all of the antidepressants, there can be some sleep disturbance, some appetite disturbance, some energizing properties to them, or it can slow people down. This is a really complicated question, and it really depends on the class of medication to know what are the common side effects of any of them. But in general, you know, you talk about any sleep changes, any appetite changes, any increased anxiety, any sleepiness. And then one thing to remember with antidepressants is it does take a while to kick in. They don't work immediately, and you have to be patient.
And I think part of what you're saying is that it's really important for your doctor and your treatment teams to know you well, to be able to select medications that stand, at least at first, the best chance of being helpful for you, and then kind of hang in there and, and go from there. And that different people, I mean, there are people out there who can't take aspirin because they're allergic to aspirin, so everybody's kind of different than with that. Parting words, Doug.
There's hope. Again, about 80% of people who get diagnosed with depression can get better. It's important to remember that there is help. Get in early, try not to isolate, talk with somebody about it, and there can be hope.
I think that's a wonderful way to end the evening right here. We're up, our time is up. Thanks to all of you for being here, and thanks to all of you for joining in and doing a bang-up job of calling in questions this evening. And so I think the take-home message in what you heard from everyone is certainly there is hope, and Rena is the picture of hope. She is our picture, our ambassador of hope today, and she is the person, I think, who embodies the lesson that perseverance is the enemy of hopelessness. Don't forget to visit us on the web at speakyourmindonline.org, where you can find a schedule of our topics and resource links, and read my blog, the place where I answer more of your questions. And you can also email us your questions about next week's show, when we'll be discussing the very important topic of preventing suicide in young people. Until next time, I'm Dr. Carolyn Phelps. Thanks so much for watching us, and good night.